Have you ever stopped to think that everything you were taught about right and wrong might be a big lie? Nietzsche believed morality isn't a universal truth. It's an illusion created to control you. Today, we're going to uncover the dark side behind the values you follow without even questioning. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't the kind of philosopher who accepted things the way they were. He didn't see morality as something pure, eternal, or divine. To him, behind the values society praises, there's a story of conflict, resentment, and above all, the will to power. When we look at traditional morality, especially the kind shaped by the Judeo-Christian tradition, Nietzsche pushes us to ask an uncomfortable question: who created these values, and why? To investigate the origin of morality, Nietzsche dives into the genealogy of values. Instead of asking what good and evil are in some abstract way, he asks where the idea of good even came from, and who benefited from defining it that way. This historical and critical approach is eye-opening and deeply provocative. In On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche introduces a key distinction between two types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality comes from affirming life, strength, and superiority. The nobles of the ancient world, for example, didn't need to justify their power. They saw themselves as good because they were strong, healthy, successful, and victorious. Good was connected to greatness, excellence, and raising life to a higher level. As Nietzsche puts it, the good of the noble is the same as the powerful, the high, the fortunate. But the master's power created resentment in those beneath them: the weak, the oppressed, the outsiders. The people with no voice and no strength couldn't get revenge directly. They couldn't defeat the powerful on the battlefield, and they couldn't impose their own values through force. So what did they do? They made a brilliant, and in Nietzsche's view, twisted move. They flipped the values. The weak, driven by resentment, created a new morality, a morality that labeled the strong as evil and themselves as good. Now, humility became a virtue. Obedience became a sign of purity. Suffering in silence became something noble. Strength was treated like brutality. Pride became a sin. This is what Nietzsche calls slave morality, a morality built out of resentment. And according to Nietzsche, this isn't just history, it's psychology. Resentment is more than a passing feeling. It's trapped energy. It's a desire for revenge that can't come out directly, so it transforms into morality. When someone is weak and can't act, they learn to judge, and through judgment, they find a way to hold power, not through strength, but through guilt. This value reversal didn't disappear. Nietzsche believed it's still alive today, hidden inside speeches that praise sacrifice without question, treat suffering as the ultimate virtue, and attack creative strength as something suspicious. He saw Christian morality, with its focus on humility, sin, and unconditional compassion, as a tool of social control, useful for the weak to keep the strong under constant judgment. And this is where one of his most important ideas comes in: the will to power, der Wille zur Macht. For Nietzsche, life doesn't aim for comfort, safety, or salvation. Life wants to grow, to expand, to rise. Every living being, consciously or not, seeks to overcome itself, to create, to dominate, to become more. That is the will to power, a fundamental force, even deeper than survival instinct. But what happens when that will gets repressed? When it can't express itself out in the world? Nietzsche says it becomes distorted. It turns inward. The weak person's instinct for power, when it can't show up in action, shows up as the negation of someone else's action. So they create a morality that punishes those who act, shames those who take initiative, and tries to crush the vital drive to rise and become more. Now, Nietzsche isn't saying all weak people are bad, or that strong people are automatically good. His goal isn't to build a new good versus evil story. What he wants is something deeper: to expose the hidden motivations behind morality. Who benefits from these values? Do they support life, or do they deny it? Do they free you or trap you? Look at the way people talk today. How often is strength attacked, not because it's unjust, but simply because it makes others uncomfortable? How often is success painted as arrogance, ambition as selfishness, pleasure as sin? Nietzsche challenges you to ask, is this morality, or is it resentment disguised as virtue? Across history, you can see echoes of this conflict. When medieval ideals replaced the vitality of the classical world, values flipped. Art, philosophy, and the body were pushed under guilt, sin, and obedience. And even today, Nietzsche would argue that some modern moral trends repeat the same pattern. In the name of protecting, they end up suppressing. In the name of inclusion, they sometimes silence. So what does Nietzsche propose instead? He doesn't call for some blind return to the brutality of the ancient masters. What he demands is something more difficult, the courage to reevaluate values, to stop treating morality like a sacred truth and start seeing it as a human construction, and if necessary, to tear it down, to ask whether the values you follow today actually serve life, or whether they just keep resentment alive. In that sense, Nietzsche invites you to stop being a product of resentment and become a creator of values. Not a follower of herd morality, but someone who can affirm their own existence and shape their own way of living. And that begins with a philosophical and emotional decision. Stop judging life through the standards of the weak and start living with the boldness of the strong. It's a provocative idea, but also a freeing one, because it takes the weight of guilt off your shoulders and gives power back to creation. It says, you don't have to accept the values you were handed. You can create your own. But for that, you need courage. Courage to face resentment and not let it control you. Nietzsche isn't saying you should reject compassion entirely or glorify tyranny. What he's showing is that there's a difference between compassion that comes from strength, compassion that chooses to help, and compassion that comes from weakness, that only exists to pull others down. There's a difference between morality as an expression of life and morality as the denial of life. In the end, Nietzsche's attack on morality is really a call for authenticity, for inner freedom, for a life that doesn't have to hide its most vital instincts behind a mask of fake humility. Nietzsche wants you to see past the surface, question the values you inherited, and recognize when something that looks good is actually built out of fear, not virtue. Not every virtue is strength. Not every sacrifice is courage. Some values at first glance look noble: humility, compassion, obedience. But when you look closer, they can reveal something darker: a fear of life, a fear of self-assertion. This is Nietzsche's core critique of traditional morality. It isn't an expression of human strength, but a disguise for weakness. On the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche argues that the morality inherited by Western culture, especially the morality rooted in Christianity, is a reactive morality. It was created by people who couldn't act directly in the world, and so they turned to judging the world instead. To Nietzsche, the constant praise of suffering, self-denial, and humility doesn't come from spiritual elevation, but from the opposite impulse: the resentment of the weak. Slave morality needs, in order to exist, an other to deny, Nietzsche writes. It says no to life, where master morality says yes. That no to life is what Nietzsche attacks. A tradition that praises sacrifice as the highest virtue, staying quiet, shrinking yourself, always putting others first, becomes, in his view, a system that glorifies denying the will to live. And this isn't just a moral issue, it's an existential one. In this sense, morality doesn't just regulate behavior, it shapes the way we see ourselves. And when that morality is built out of weakness, it teaches that it's wrong to want too much, to assert yourself too much, to trust yourself too much. So virtues become shaped not by vitality, but by restraint. And instead of being fully lived, life gets domesticated. Nietzsche makes it clear. This morality isn't true in any absolute sense. It's useful. useful for people who had to survive without power, who had no real way to fight, to impose themselves, or to win. For them, creating a morality that glorified pain and demonized strength was a strategic way to make sense of their condition. The problem is that once this morality spread, it started presenting itself as universal. And that's where the illusion begins. In The Antichrist, Nietzsche writes, "Christianity is a metaphysics of executioners. It falsifies human nature and turns all healthy values into guilt." In that line, he shows his accusation clearly. Traditional morality rejects the most basic human instincts. Instead of lifting life up, it makes life feel shameful. Pleasure becomes sin. Strength becomes brutality. The natural drive to rise and overcome becomes arrogance. Everything that could push a person forward starts being treated as dangerous, sinful, or undesirable. And why? Because those who can't reach something often turn to judging it. Those who can't rise condemn the people who stand higher. Nietzsche says the morality of weakness is, above all, reactive. It needs someone out there living fully so it can point and say, "That's wrong." It becomes the perfect disguise for anyone afraid of being free, afraid of wanting, failing, exposing themselves, living boldly. Take sacrifice, for example. It gets treated like the highest virtue, but as Nietzsche points out, many times it's just a way to escape the responsibility of living intensely. Someone who sacrifices everything, their desires, freedom, energy, and potential, isn't automatically generous. They might just be running from the weight of truly claiming their own existence. Of course, Nietzsche isn't saying helping, loving, or giving in is always wrong. The issue is turning that attitude into an absolute moral rule when it comes from fear, not strength. As he puts it, what is good? Everything that increases the feeling of power in a person. What is bad? Everything that comes from weakness. The Antichrist, paragraph 2. That idea is uncomfortable, and it should be, because it forces you to ask, does my morality come from my strength or from my weakness? Even compassion, which society praises so much, gets questioned. Nietzsche often sees it as a subtle way of keeping someone stuck in their pain. Feeling sorry for someone isn't always an act of greatness. It can be a way of staying above them, reducing them to an eternal victim. And more than that, excessive compassion can stop us from acting, transforming, demanding change. It freezes things. Instead of encouraging someone to grow past suffering, it makes suffering permanent. This moral model is deeply rooted in Western culture. You can see it in public attitudes, praising blind obedience, resignation, self-erasure, as if human greatness means disappearing from your own life. Nietzsche sees that as a deep rejection of what's most human, the will to overcome yourself and affirm your existence in a creative, authentic way. Man is something that must be overcome, he says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And that overcoming doesn't come from guilt or obedience. It comes from awakening your own strength. So what does Nietzsche propose? Not the destruction of all morality, but the creation of a new morality, one that comes from strength, health, and the joy of being alive. A morality that doesn't condemn desire, but guides it. That doesn't repress life, but amplifies it. That doesn't teach you to be ashamed of who you are, but pushes you to become what you could be. This new morality isn't handed to you. It's earned. It isn't inherited. It's created, and it can only be built by someone who has the courage to rip off the mask of weakness, look at their impulses without guilt, and choose their values based on affirming life, not denying it. And that isn't easy. It takes clarity. It takes strength. And above all, it takes the willingness to leave behind the comfortable safety of imposed morality, the kind that already has ready-made answers, and step into the powerful uncertainty of building your own path. Nietzsche's critique still feels modern. In a world where opinions and values are repeated without thought, where people expect automatic moral obedience, he invites you into a radical move. Question the origin of what you call virtue. What looks good might just be convenient. What looks fair might just be fear in disguise. The question remains, does the morality I follow make me grow or keep me small? Does it set me free or domesticate me? Does it connect me to my power or force me to deny it in the name of an empty ideal? Not every morality sets you free. Some of it, in reality, is just control. Even when it looks like justice and equality on the surface, there are moral systems designed to flatten people, tame them, cut down creative instincts, and turn a human being into just another piece of the herd. Nietzsche calls this herd morality, a morality built to keep the weak protected and the strong held back. A morality that prefers obedience over authenticity, repetition over creation, submission over self-overcoming. But to understand this critique, you first have to understand the contrast Nietzsche lays out. Master morality versus slave morality. The nobles created good and bad. The slaves created good and evil. On the genealogy of morality. This difference isn't just historical. It's a key that helps us understand how the values we follow shape the way we exist. And most importantly, it helps us see why so many of our moral ideals carry, underneath everything, the poison of resentment. Master morality is the kind that comes from strength, health, and confidence in one's own existence. It doesn't need to justify itself, and it doesn't need to attack anyone else. The noble, the creator, the authentic person. That person doesn't look outward to figure out who they are. They act. They affirm their values through lived experience. They create meaning through growth and self-overcoming. In the ancient world, for example, this morality lived among aristocrats, warriors, thinkers, and artists who, by affirming themselves, created their own ideals of good, honor, beauty, and courage. For them, the good person wasn't the obedient one, but the great one, the one who lives intensely, takes risks, and transforms. Nietzsche isn't praising the brutality of the masters. What he praises is their ability to create their own values without needing the herd's approval. Good, for the master, is whatever expresses power, generosity, courage, independence, self-overcoming. This kind of morality affirms life. It accepts suffering as part of growth. It values the body, instincts, desires. And more than that, it doesn't need to hate anyone. It doesn't come from denial, but from creation. The higher man does not let resentment rule him. He acts, he transforms. On the genealogy of morality. In contrast, slave morality appears, a morality built from weakness, fear, and powerlessness. Slaves, without the strength to affirm themselves, create a moral system that denies everything the masters represent. If I can't be strong, then strength must be evil. If I can't win, then victory must be arrogance. If I can't desire, then desire must be sin. This is where resentment is born. A stored-up psychological energy that can't express itself through action, so it explodes as judgment. Slave morality doesn't say yes to anything. It lives by saying no to someone else. It denies, accuses, condemns. What drives it isn't creativity, but reaction. Slave morality begins with a no to the other. The yes to itself comes later, as something secondary. The result is a reversal of values. The weak becomes good, the obedient becomes virtuous, the one who suffers becomes holy. This morality doesn't lift anyone up. It just turns suffering into something sacred and submission into an obligation. Nietzsche sees this reversal as a poison that spread through Western culture, disguised as compassion and equality. But deep down, it becomes a tool for control, a way to shut down any attempt at greatness, any expression of individuality, any life force that wants to break out of mediocrity. When slave morality becomes the dominant culture, Nietzsche calls it herd morality. That's when everyone starts thinking the same, wanting the same things, obeying without questioning, and most of all, watching each other to make sure nobody dares to step out of line. The herd survives through conformity. Collective safety becomes more important than truth. Equality becomes a goal in itself, even if it costs the freedom and vitality of those who could create new paths. The idea of justice gets used to drag everyone down to the same level, stopping anyone from standing out. Wherever the spirit of the herd wins, individual freedom disappears. Thus spoke Zarathustra. This morality isn't neutral. It's hostile to difference, risk, and courage. Creative people look suspicious. Independent people look dangerous. Bold people quickly get labeled immoral, arrogant, or threatening. Not because they harm others, but because they break the comfortable silence of mediocrity. Nietzsche saw this system as one of modern life's greatest dangers, the standardizing of thought and the worship of obedience. Herd morality creates a society with no drive, no soul, where everyone lives afraid of being wrong, of upsetting others, of looking too different. But the deepest damage hits the creative individual, the one who wants more, who feels the call to rise above, who carries an inner force that doesn't fit into ready-made rules. When that person meets herd morality, they get silenced, pushed aside, mocked, or made to feel guilty. They start doubting themselves. They start hiding what's most powerful in them out of fear of rejection. And little by little, their creative fire goes out. Nietzsche writes in Ecce Homo, "The man of the future will be the one who breaks away from the herd, the one who creates new values, the one who affirms life even when it demands pain. That man, the Übermensch, the Overman, is the one who frees himself from slave morality and herd morality and creates his own ethics based on affirming existence, inner strength, and the courage to be who he is, even when the entire world points a finger, herd or creator." Which path do you choose? Nietzsche's challenge is still alive today. In a world that feels more watched than ever, where people are constantly afraid of standing out, making mistakes, being judged, what he proposes is not some wild morality of selfishness, but a return to authenticity. He asks, are you following values that bring out your power? Or are you just obeying ideas designed to keep everything the same? Is your morality an expression of your strength, or a result of your fear? Because herd morality feels comfortable, but it comes with a price. It demands that you sacrifice what's most unique in you. Creative morality is harder, but freeing. It demands responsibility, courage, and letting go of easy approval. But in return, it gives you back the fullness of living with truth. Most people live their whole lives following values they never chose. They grow up being told what's right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral, as if these ideas were absolute truths, eternal and natural. But what if they aren't? What if the values we follow so confidently are just historical constructions, useful in certain times, but completely outdated today? This is where one of Nietzsche's most provocative ideas comes in: the revaluation of all values, Umwertung aller Werte. Nietzsche doesn't just want to criticize morality, he wants to overturn the very foundation it was built on. It's not enough to reject one specific value or question one isolated behavior. He proposes something much more radical, questioning the value of values themselves. Why do we believe what we believe? Who do these values serve? Do they affirm life or deny it? This revaluation is the moment when a person breaks away from inherited illusions and becomes the creator of their own principles. It's a deep philosophical and existential shift that separates the average person from the Übermensch, the Overman, the one who rises above herd morality and chooses to live with authenticity. What is a value? For Nietzsche, every value is an interpretation. There is no good or evil in itself. What exists are human interpretations shaped by social, political, psychological, and historical conditions. Christian morality, for example, didn't appear because someone discovered an eternal truth. It emerged because, at a certain time, it was useful for the weak to reverse values and turn submission into virtue. But what's useful isn't the same as what's true. And that's the danger. When we forget that values are constructed, we start treating them like absolute truths. Humility stops being a choice and becomes an obligation. Suffering becomes something to praise. Pleasure becomes a sin. Instinct gets repressed. And little by little, life is denied in the name of a morality that no longer helps us grow. What is called morality today was, in earlier times, immorality. On the genealogy of morality. With that line, Nietzsche shows us that what we call natural today used to look strange, and what we reject today as wrong used to be respected. Values change, and anyone who never questions them ends up living under dead rules. Revaluation begins with the conscious destruction of inherited values. That doesn't mean breaking rules recklessly. It means digging into the roots of each value and asking, is this really mine, or was it planted in me? Does this value expand me or limit me? Does it make me stronger, or does it paralyze me? Nietzsche doesn't believe in shallow rebellion. The problem isn't just obedience, it's obedience without thought. It's not that good and evil are automatically wrong by themselves. The problem is accepting them as if they came from outside us, like commands imposed by some higher moral authority. Revaluation demands that you become the author of your own existence. But here's the challenge. Destroying is easy. Creating is hard. Nietzsche knew that nihilism, the collapse of traditional values, would push many people into emptiness, into the feeling that nothing matters anymore. He called this the death of God, not as a direct attack on religion, but as the collapse of an entire structure of meaning. And after that symbolic death, one brutal question appears. Now what? What do we believe in? How do we live? That's where the Übermensch is born. The Übermensch is not a superhero, and not a tyrant either. For Nietzsche, the Übermensch is the person who has surpassed the ordinary human being, the one still trapped in herd morality, fear, resentment, and blind obedience. The Übermensch creates new values, not out of resentment, but out of a deep affirmation of life. He doesn't need external commandments because he stands on his own. He doesn't seek approval because he stays loyal to his own strength. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. Thus spoke Zarathustra. That line captures Nietzsche's vision of self-overcoming. Humans are not a final achievement. They are a transition, an unfinished project that can be surpassed. And that surpassing doesn't happen through submission to moral laws, but through the courage to create a new way of living. Nietzsche admits that traditional morality had its role. At one time, it was useful to organize society, protect the weak, and give meaning to pain. But that usefulness is historical, not eternal. The mistake is turning it into an absolute. Acting like those values must last forever, even when they no longer help us grow. That's the useful illusion. A belief system that served a certain time, but now becomes a cage. A morality that instead of forming free individuals, produces people who are domesticated, full of guilt for desiring, insecure about creating, and desperate to please. Nietzsche wants us to break free from that illusion, to realize that the good we were taught might be the most disguised prison of all. That virtue might just be fear of living, that following ready-made rules without reflection is one of the most effective ways to deny who you really are. Every morality is a tyranny against nature, even when it disguises itself as love, the Antichrist. Revaluating isn't just a philosophical move, it's a rebirth. It requires looking inward with brutal honesty, recognizing the lies we tell ourselves, admitting that many of our values are really just fear, convenience, or conditioning. But it's also an act of creation. It's slowly building a new way of being in the world, one that affirms the body, emotions, desire, and the will to power. An ethics of life, not an ethics of denying life. This new morality won't look the same for everyone. There's no formula. What Nietzsche calls for is the radical freedom of each person becoming who they are. And that inevitably means living by chosen values, not inherited ones. But be careful. That freedom comes with weight. It demands creative responsibility. Anyone who breaks away from traditional morality can't hide behind cynicism. Creating new values doesn't mean living with no rules. It means living by rules that come from authenticity. It's easier to follow a ready-made code than to create your own. But real life, the life that pulses, transforms, and rises, can only be lived by those who accept the risk of thinking for themselves. The revaluation of all values is Nietzsche's final call. It's an invitation to the courage of living without moral crutches. It's the challenge of building meaning without asking permission. It's the most dangerous step, but also the most freeing one. Because when you leave behind the values that no longer serve you, you don't become immoral, you become real. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If this video made you think, leave a like, share it with someone, and comment down below. What value have you questioned in your life? And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. There's a lot more philosophy coming your way. Stick with us, and I'll see you in the next one.